Today I'm installing a HomeLink mirror and harness in a 2024 Acura Integra Type S. This mirror is intended for the 2023 Honda Accord, but most of the Honda lineup shares the same architecture and the Integra is based on the Civic. The original mirror that comes on the Integra only comes with a single button for auto nighttime dimming, but no garage opener buttons. The reason we need a harness is because the connector for this mirror is different than the one for the Integra. The Civic does have the option for a HomeLink mirror, and it uses the same connector as the Integra, which makes the install a lot easier, but that mirror is not frameless, and I like the frameless look better. The instructions I used were for the Accord, so they are slightly different. I ended up skipping a few steps, but I'll mention them as I go along. I'll put the part numbers and a link to the instructions I used in the description below. Be sure to do this at your own risk, as there's always a possibility of messing up and breaking your car. One thing to note is that the HomeLink controls work even if the car is off, so if you park outside and are worried about someone breaking into the car and opening your garage, you might want to make a modification to the mirror wiring and have the HomeLink power coming from accessory power instead of the constant 12 volt. I park in a garage, so I'm not worried about this, but I've seen this modification done in the Integra forums and Facebook groups. Let's get started. Now, I apologize in advance if I don't show some of the steps. I was filming with one hand and needed two hands for some of them, but I'll do my best to explain what I did. The first thing the install instructions mentioned was to disconnect the battery. I didn't do that, but if you're worried about possibly messing up and shorting something, it's probably safer to disconnect it. Make sure you wait a few minutes after turning the car off in order to do so. The install instructions mentioned to take out the sunglasses storage and the driver's side visor. I started going down that route by unscrewing the two screws inside the sunglass holder. There are some pretty strong clips holding it in on the back, and I wasn't able to get them loose. I didn't want to pull too hard and risk breaking them, but turns out I didn't need to do that. On the Accord, you might need to access up there in order to hide the original mirror harness, but I was able to do everything without having to move that harness. This next step was probably the biggest pain of the entire install. I needed to take this plastic cover off the base of the mirror, so I used a plastic trim removal tool to try to open it up. It was on there pretty tight. After about 20 minutes of struggling, I thought to use a smaller tool, so I grabbed this plastic tool I had laying around from when I replaced my phone screen. This worked pretty well, and it allowed me to get into that tight space and slowly push apart the plastic connection. Now that we have the pieces off, let me show you how it works, so it'll be easier to take off. This circle is where the stem of the mirror comes out. You have some tabs along the edges holding some two pieces together. As mentioned earlier, I used this plastic trim tool that I got with the phone screen replacement kit. I started at the front and worked my way around the bottom to the lower back part where you see all the tabs. These two tabs on the side hold both pieces into the flat piece that we'll be removing next. So once you have the two pieces broken apart from each other, you can simply pull them off one by one. Next, I reached the plastic trim tool to the side and slid it around to the bottom to pry open the clips on either side here. This piece just slides right out. After that, I disconnected the mirror connector. There's a small tab you have to push in with your thumb and the connector should slide right out. Finally, I removed the mirror. You need to twist the mirror base about 15 degrees counterclockwise. I found this hard to do by hand, so I used some locking pliers for leverage. Next, I installed the new mirror by doing the opposite. I aligned the clips in the back and rotated the base 15 degrees clockwise until it snapped into place. Now it's time to install the harness. I started by pulling off the weather stripping from the door using a plastic trim removal tool to get it loose, and pulling it off a bit more with my hand. For now, all I needed to get off was the part going down the A-pillar. Next, I had to pull off the A-pillar trim. Be extremely careful here as your side curtain airbag runs along the A-pillar. I took extreme caution not to puncture or even touch it. There are two different clips holding the trim in. If you pull on the top of the trim, the top clip should open up, but it will not fully come off until you slide the trim upward. The bottom one is just a standard clip that pulls straight out. I reached my hand behind the trim and pulled to get the bottom clip out. I had to slide my finger behind the trim and wiggle the upper clip out of the trim. Here you can see where the upper clip attaches to the A-pillar trim. Once the A-pillar trim is off, you need to disconnect the speaker. The connector has a tab you need to push in with your thumb and it should slide right out. Next, I removed the upper clip. This was probably the second hardest part of this whole process. You need to press the tabs on either side to slide it out. I used a metal pick, which probably wasn't the greatest idea because you can scratch your paint. You can probably do this with a pair of plastic curved toothpicks. It's a one-time use clip, so you don't want to reuse it. There was another one included in the box with a harness. Don't put it in yet though. Here's the replacement clip. As you can see, it has not been pulled apart yet. The original clip has and should not be reused. Next, I peeled back some more of the weather stripping to get access to the trim pieces below and to the left of the steering wheel. I started with the trim with the stability control button on it. There are a few plastic clips holding it in, so I started by pulling on it along the edges. A plastic trim removal tool along the top and sides is a huge help here. Once it came off, I disconnected the stability control button. Here's the back of the panel along with the 8 clips that you'll need to undo. Under here is the fuse box, and this is the port we need access to so we can plug in the harness. But before doing that, this side trim piece needs to come off. It's held on by one bolt and a few clips. The bolt can be taken off either with a 9mm socket or a Phillips head screwdriver. I used a trim removal tool to pry the clips. You can see the 3 clips up here. Next, I labeled the 2 fuses on the harness with the provided stickers. They are 2 amp fuses. Now it's time to route the harness and connect it. I started by plugging the connector into the port on the fuse box. First, I routed it behind this harness so it's nice and secure and out of the way. Next, I routed the harness up the A-pillar and along the thicker harness already there, being sure to keep it away from the curtain airbag. I added a few zip ties to secure it to the thicker harness, again being mindful of the airbag and making sure the harness wouldn't get in the way of the clips. You want it a little bit loose at the bend at the bottom of the A-pillar, but tight enough between the zip ties that it won't sag and potentially interfere with the airbag. Finally, I tucked the top section of the harness into the headliner and ran it all the way to the mirror base and plugged the connector into the mirror. I had a little bit of excess harness, so I tucked it back under the headliner a bit. Don't worry if there's a little bit of slack. Once you put the trim back on, you won't be able to see it. I zip tied the end to the original mirror harness to prevent some potential rattling down the line. Next, I installed the provided 15 amp fuse in the fuse box. It goes right here in the 3rd row and 3rd column down, just like that. Next, I took the provided 15 amp sticker and placed it on the fuse diagram, so in the future I remember what that fuse is for. At this point, I plugged in the mirror and temporarily secured the ground connection so I could test and make sure the mirror works before putting everything back together. I used this point for the ground as it was easy to get to. The Accord instruction suggested using this point back here, but that spot is a different spot on the Accord and it's a lot easier to access than it is on the Integra. After you test it, make sure you disconnect the ground again, as you'll need the bolt to secure the panel back on. Also, if you were working with a disconnected battery and you reconnected your battery to test, be sure you disconnect it again before continuing. Next, I went through and cut off the ends of all the zip ties I added. Finally, I put all the trim pieces back, starting with the side trim piece between the door and the dashboard. First, slide the back in, then line up the clips and push them in. Finally, line up the ground connection underneath it so it's touching the bare metal and tighten the bolt. Make sure it's nice and snug so it makes a good ground connection. This is a good time to test the mirror and make sure your connection is good. Next, get the trim with the traction control button back on. Make sure you connect the traction control button first. Line up all the clips before pushing any of them in, and then go around and pop them all in. The next step is to reinstall the A-pillar trim. The green clip fell out, so I'll put that back in. I'll go ahead and use the new clip that came with the harness. This side of the clip goes into the hole in the A-pillar, and these slots are where the clip slides into the A-pillar trim piece, just like that. Slide the bottom of the trim where it goes, down there, being mindful of the airbag and the wiring harness. I almost forgot to plug in my speakers, so don't forget to do that. Line up the trim in the correct spot on the A-pillar. You can use this bend here as a reference point. Notice the bend matches on the A-pillar and the trim. Once those are lined up, go ahead and push in the clips. Give it a little push, not too hard. Now we can reseat the weather stripping. Just go around and push it in by hand. Now we'll go ahead and slide this trim piece right in, like so. Align the back with these channels and slide it right in. Then you need to pop these two clips in. Finally, we need to install the cover for the base. I found it easiest to install the right side first while sitting in the passenger seat. The top clip just slides into that flat panel I just installed. Once it's in, go back to the driver's seat and install the left side. Squeeze both sides together until all the clips click. Feel around the back side of it with your fingers to make sure the vent looking part of it is aligned properly and not inside the left part. Now for the moment of truth. Go ahead and program your garage opener. I already did this off camera, but what you want to do is hold the first and third garage door buttons for about 10 seconds until the light flashes rapidly. Then let go and hold the button on your remote and the button you want to program at the same time. And don't let go of either one until the light is either solid or flashing quickly. Finally, let go of both buttons and press the button you just programmed one more time and you should be good to go. That's how you install a HomeLink mirror in the 2024 Acura Integra Type S. Thanks for watching.